Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Pax Americana. I am Julie Roginsky here with Olga Lautman. Happy birthday, Olga. You were away last week for your birthday.
Yes. Yes, I was detached and unplugged, and thank you so much. And it was so nice to actually step out in the world and and
You have
and
people
do
live when they're not
things.
tethered to Substack.
Yes. Or Trump and not
Or
hear
Trump.
Trump and
Yeah.
just plug out. So yes, thank you, thank you.
Well, great to have you back. And you were deeply missed because there was a lot of stuff going on, especially not this past Friday, but the Friday before, right after we did the last Pax Americana, and you took off for the week. The Trump administration released its national security strategy, which is, I mean, there's so much to say about it that I did a whole three-part series on it the week that you were gone. But to put it in context, the national security strategy is something that most administrations release really once a term, once an administration, that lays out their thesis, their doctrine, I guess is the best way to describe it, for how they proceed to think about foreign policy, national security, and so on. This was shocking. Does not begin. Well, I guess it's not shocking. It was shocking, but not surprising, I guess is the best way to put it, Olga. Um, but what was also shocking is that it didn't get much press the way it should have
Nope.
in media, which again is just such a failure. And I get it. I get that Jeffrey Epstein is salacious, and I get that there are real victims involved, and for all the reasons that Jeffrey Epstein should be getting all this attention. But we could surely chew gum and walk at the same time. And this should have gotten at least the same amount of attention in the national security strategy. I think for the purposes of this show, because we don't want to take up 17 hours discussing every aspect of it, we should talk specifically about how it addresses Russia, Ukraine, Europe, and what it means for the world. And I guess I'll just go first and get your reaction and then see what jumped out at you. We have now said that we are creating spheres of influence, that we are, well, not in so many words, but we are bringing back the Monroe Doctrine, and more relevantly, not just the Monroe Doctrine, which said that Europe shouldn't be meddling in the Western Hemisphere, which was that came about just a couple of decades after the Revolutionary War. But more importantly, the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, which basically said that we are going to defend our interests in our Western Hemisphere however we want and by whichever means we want. And that was something that Teddy Roosevelt put forward in the early part of the 20th century. His cousin, Franklin Roosevelt, actually got rid of it right around his own inauguration through the good neighbor policy. I don't want to belabor the history of this other than to say that since Franklin Roosevelt, we have tried, not always successfully and sometimes pretty abysmally, but we have at least pretended to be good neighbors. And I understand if you don't come at me with what we did in Chile, don't come at me with what we did in other parts of Panama and other parts of, I get it. I get the United States has been really bad and imperfect in enforcing the good neighbor policy, but at least on paper, we have this policy. Now we're basically telling the world, this is our sphere of influence. Well, if this is our sphere of influence here, what do you think Vladimir Putin is going to say about Europe? And what do you think that Xi Jinping is going to say about Asia?
I mean, I can only add that Trump seems to be setting up actually a battle with Putin for sphere of influence, because I read the European part as basically the United States is now going to act like Russia, what Russia has done over the past
Yeah.
few decades of running malign influence operations, supporting far right parties, propping up these parties, providing all the logistical, financial support of these parties, embedding the far right parties across Europe, with their Russian intelligence agents to assist in election attacks within the target countries and whatnot. Basically, this is what we're doing, except Russia never put this on paper. They do it with plausible deniability and say, that's it. We literally put out that, I mean, basically, there's a whole section on Europe that we could use our intelligence tools to manipulate internal domestic politics within target countries. So that means we are now going to what Russia has been doing silently. We are either going to team up with them and then maybe divide, whatever uh, comes out of it if should Europe fall. But basically, that we now can step in and support as our policy, as again, U.S. taxpayers will be paying for this. We can support the AFD party. We can support every far right Nazi extremist movement in Europe as long as it goes against the centrist governments and subverts the democracy of the country. So this is basically we've become on paper what Russia has been doing. Will we actually go ahead and start carrying out these policies of supporting all these extremist fringe groups? And providing intelligence and logistical and financial support in order for them to to steal elections. Will we do it? I don't know, but at least on paper this is what I read. Not to mention, don't get me started on a section where it said the Ukraine war, as if Ukraine decided to invade itself, start committing genocide, strike apartment buildings against itself. I mean, it's not it's
Yeah, yeah.
Russia's genocidal invasion that began over a decade ago. And frankly, this whitewashes what Russia has done, the genocide, the kidnapping of children, and all the atrocities that they've committed.
It's pretty fascinating because um, you know, it's the Trump doctrine. And it's something that I think has not necessarily been discussed enough. But this is somebody, I mean, I called it Welcome to Trumpistan because that's basically what it is.
An,
It's,
an oblast of
yeah,
Russia.
an obelisk, right? It's an obelisk of an obelisk of Vladimir Putin of Russia. Um, you know, a few carefully chosen pages and strategy documents, and I want people to really understand this, from Cold War playbooks to post 9/11 doctrines, can really shape the destiny of nations. And this NSS is doing something much more consequential, which is it's rewriting not just American foreign policy, but the checks and balances that stood between democratic governance and unchecked power, both at home and abroad. And you might think at first blush it leads like a nationalist fantasy. It talks about America first. It talks about a reindustrialization. I mean, it's like kind of very similar to if you read about, and I'm not loath to make these analogies anymore. I used to, but about the reindustrialization of the Ruhr back in the 1930s, when a different country was talking about these kinds of things, energy dominance, excuse me, of course, the Monroe Doctrine. But you step back and you begin to see who really stands to win. It's not the American people, but it's really the world's richest oligarchs and the private tycoons and autocrats who buy access and influence and protection. And of course, that would be Donald Trump, and not in his capacity as president of the United States or the leader of the free world, although he's certainly not that, but Donald Trump, the billionaire.
Mhm.
Because what this does, Olga, it is effectively erasing the guardrails. There's no serious commitment to transparency, corruption prevention, the rule of law. And the focus is quite explicit and it's very blunt, right? It's money, it's military strength and raw power. But most importantly, the focus is on wealth that benefits the well connected. Because what we're saying is it's like the mob, right? If you want to pay us a protection racket, you can. And Russia is barely mentioned here, but the NSS it does a hell of a job carrying water for Putin anyway. It scolds Europe for what it calls their unrealistic expectations in Ukraine and then lectures them on everything they're doing wrong while saying nary a word about the Putin regime, which is threatening their security. It says that when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, the real center of gravity for this White House is the US Russia relationship. It talks about the fact that, yes, it does say that Ukraine will survive as a quote unquote viable state and the United States will help rebuild it someday. And it calls for a quick, quote, expeditious cessation of hostilities in Ukraine. But what it says is that the priorities for the United States establish strategic stability with Russia. Um, it doesn't talk at all about preserving Ukraine's territorial integrity, or it certainly doesn't address what Kushner and Wickoff and Putin were doing in Moscow a few weeks ago, which is when they were throwing Ukraine under the bus in exchange for cold hard Russian cash. So, if you read between the lines, the document provides the underpinnings for the rebuilding of a rump Ukraine, which will come at a huge markup to enrich people who Trump is close to, including Donald Trump. It's the mob mentality. I mean, I don't know how else to describe this. This is, if you watch, I don't know, The Godfather. I felt like they had more honor, the Corleones, than this. But it's just a mobster mentality. You will cede land when we tell you to cede land, and in exchange for us allowing you to do that, while allowing you to keep some little rump part of the land that we're going to allow you to keep, you got to have us come in and you've got to give us money, 50% or whatever the number is, for reconstruction efforts. And you know, and I know that that money is not going anywhere but to Trump and his cronies. And for all, of ExxonMobil and all these other energy companies that are dying to get back into Russia, I mean, I'm old enough to remember, and they certainly should be too, and their shareholders. If you're listening to me and you own money in places like ExxonMobil and you're a shareholder, remember this. We've seen this movie before. Russia will allow them to come in just long enough for all the sanctions to come off, and then it will nationalize and seize their assets again and kick them all out. Again, because that's what Putin does. You can't do business there.
Though, for anyone watching, you can't do business in U.S. either, because we are headed down the same path. What is interesting is, look, I am happy that Trump did write this, national security strategy and put it out on paper, because if Europe had any doubt, in last year when Trump was campaigning and basically said, I'm going to allow, if a NATO country doesn't pay up, then Russia, I invite you to invade them. If Europe didn't get the message then and missed the message in February when Zelensky got ambushed and kicked out of the White House, which has never happened in history, where we treated an ally this poorly and humiliated them, on the world stage, to the betrayal of pulling weapons and intelligence sharing, to attacking, European elections and interfering in European elections, which we already started with Elon Musk, who was propping up the AfD party. And again, this is a neo-Nazi rooted white supremacist party that has been financed and, provided support by Russia for well over a decade, to the point that I remember laughing, and Olga, not me, who was a deputy for AfD in Hamburg last year, when fleeing back to Omsk. After the German intelligence was closing in, and they realized, I'm sure, that she's was a Russian agent, embedded within the party. So she grabbed her children, fled to Omsk. I remember Russia causing a big hoo-ha, of how the Germans were going to separate her and her child, and she fled to protect her child, and the same nonsense that they normally do. But with this lays out exactly what is in Trump's head. And I hope with this, one, the Republicans are going to be put against the wall, because they, interestingly enough, have started pushing back on Trump. And, they need to be pushed against this and have the pressure of, what are we doing here? Why are we attacking our allies when a genocidal monster is being praised, and where we want to align our, foreign policy and dealings with Putin. And two, I hope Europe wakes up because look, they really, really, I mean, if they haven't received all these wake up calls, hopefully this is the final one that really says, you know what, that's it. America is gone as far as we know for now. America is gone. Will they trust us again? Absolutely not. It's going to take a long time. But, will Trump be able to accomplish these things? I'm not sure because this is the most like really, they've done a lot of damage and humiliated America, but they're the most incompetent people I've ever seen. I mean, if Putin ran Russia like this, when he grabbed power, he'd be freaking in a ditch within a year. Like literally, no one would allow him to stay there because you can have the thuggery and the cruelness and everything else, but you can't have this incompetence. These people are
Well,
just incompetent. I mean,
you
beyond it.
know, I don't know that I agree with that because I will say this. Part of this NSS, which I think is incredibly dangerous, and if there are European friends watching this, and I know there always are, just be mindful of this. It actively calls for regime change, not in so many
Yeah.
words, but it actively calls for regime change in Germany, in France, in Britain, and basically in European countries that now they claim are not representing the interests of the quote unquote peace party in Europe. I interviewed Jim Himes, Michelle and I interviewed Jim Himes on our podcast, on the Mayday podcast last week, who's the ranking member on the House Select Intelligence Committee. And he said if Putin were sitting in the Kremlin and getting drunk and taking shots and saying, what can I get the United States to agree to? Even this would not have been in his best fantasy.
No.
But effectively, what the United States is doing is putting its own imprimatur and potentially money behind the Nigel Farages of the world in Britain, the Jordan Bardellas in France,
Yep.
the AFDs you mentioned already in Germany. And what that will do is effectively capitulate the European experiment and make it subservient to Vladimir Putin. That's not nothing. I mean, think about how Europe is being squeezed from the east by the Russians with Russian aggression, and how it's being squeezed from the west by the United States, which is actively advocating for regime change. Look, these are all major NATO countries, and you know that if Farage or Bardella or AFD got into power, the EU would certainly probably collapse. NATO potentially. And all Trump needs is for somebody other than the United States to pull out of NATO to give him the predicate, to say, well, it's not us. The Europeans don't want our protection anymore. And that's the part that I think is terrifying. And that's the part that is terrifying about this document, among many other things that are terrifying about this document, is these are efforts that this government, our government, is doing in our name, and saying, by the way, in a complete and blatant lie, and I want this also to not go unnoticed, that the reason they're doing this is because European governments are not reflective of their people's views on peace, that the people want peace in Ukraine and their governments are warmongers. Well, there was an interesting poll that came out just that week, before this NSS came out. So the timing was actually perfect. That said that the vast majority of people, and by vast majority I mean over 60%, in Britain and France, maybe not Britain, they didn't poll Britain, but in France, in Germany, and in Poland, sided with Ukraine and wanted Ukraine to prevail. So I don't know who the United States is talking to. Clearly, they're talking to Nigel Farage and people like that. But if you look at polling says something very different because they understand. They very much understand what's at stake.
And that's where I have, that I'm putting my hope into, because Trump on paper can rewrite every government. He can overthrow every centrist government in Europe that he wants on paper. there is a big difference with people, with the actual voters. And I mean, if we're seeing a backlash in the United States, I mean, to the point that every district, I think there was another race before yesterday, I saw in Kentucky or something, a plus 20 district where a Democrat won, or plus 30 or some crazy number. If we're seeing the backlash here, can you just imagine in Europe? If that's where I say that with Trump's boldness, he can actually, it could work two ways, one of two ways. One, all the intelligence support and financial support and doing everything to put these people in power within their respective countries might work, which I doubt, but it might say. The other is that the people that Trump is so toxic and that Europeans are going to honestly, I hate to say it, hate America, Americans so much to the point, not American people per se, but, America as a thought that anything Trump touches literally will make these parties toxic. So if, for instance, people know that U.S. is throwing their full weight behind the Farage, the Brits might be like, you know what, screw America. We don't want them interfering in our politics. This is our country. We're a sovereign country, and we're not going to allow them to pick our leader. So it works both ways, and it's just a matter for the people to wake up. And, as far as when it comes to Europe, because they're much closer to Russia, they are the ones seeing the drone incursions across, NATO countries, shutting down airports, the arson attacks, the cyber attacks on railways, on airports. I mean, they're the ones experiencing it. Germany, I believe, is now taking it up a few more notches of actually mobilizing people to start preparing them for war. So they, Trump can say we don't want merch, so, all he wants, and that we need to be friends with Russia and whatnot. The German people for themselves are going to say, well, do we want, AFD that Trump is championing for and like doing everything to put them in power? Or do we want our own sovereignty and freedom and, and whatnot? And the majority of people are supportive in, for Ukrainians because they know Ukrainians were minding their business when Russia launched an invasion in 2014 and then the full scale invasion in 2022. And today it's Ukraine. Tomorrow it could be Estonia, Poland. It could be any other country in Europe. So they know, that there's nothing stopping Russia from, tomorrow attacking France or attacking Lithuania or Latvia. Or, I mean, there's a number of countries that Russia, is salivating to take down and to conquer. So that's why I say we also have to take in effect the people because here, you see Trump is, you know, spreading disinformation and propaganda about how cheap everything is. American people aren't buying that shit. Disinformation works when you're comfortable. But once you're going to a store and you're the one who has to make the sacrifices and figure out I have X amount of money this week. After I pay bills, how much do I put towards food, towards gas, towards, life? Um, Trump can tell you that everything is perfect and that you should, have a $5 million savings. You know what it is and what your economy in your own house is. People aren't looking at the broader economy; they're looking at the economy within their own household, and that's why you see Republicans are getting their ass kicked because clearly, all the propaganda and disinformation that they are attempting to shove down Americans' throats, they're not buying it. Like they understand, like this is all a lie.
Yeah, they are. And yet what you're seeing right now is something pernicious that's rising. And I actually have a newsletter coming out on this tomorrow, but I would hope people correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. I think MAGA 1.0 is over. I think Trump is old news. I think even MAGA is tiring of Trump because the same stuff that used to be effective is not effective anymore. The grievance, the cult of personality, it's all fine when he was quote unquote winning, but even they understand now that he's not winning. He's not winning by giving them the Epstein files. Whatever is going to come out tomorrow is not going to be what they're going to anticipate having seen. I mean, Susie Wiles all but telegraphed that. It's not going to be Bill Clinton on a platter. They're disgusted with that. They are disgusted certainly with the economy that he promised that he was going to fix. They are disgusted with the level of deportations, because you saw that even again with Susie Wiles saying that to Vanity Fair that they've gone too far. So unless you're like in that 10% of like serious diehard MAGA, even his own supporters are starting to lose faith in him, and that's why his
Or
numbers
being paid,
are
like the
right,
influencers we see online.
right, right. But what is more pernicious is what's coming next. And what's coming next is not the Erica Kirk brand of MAGA, which is all about forgiveness and Jesus and love. I mean, what she misunderstands is that the reason her husband was so successful is that he had massive bloodlust. I mean, massive bloodlust. This is a guy who wanted to have public executions on television and have little kids at the age of 10 watch them because he thought that was going to be a good grooming exercise to get them to toughen up. That kind of stuff works. Her whole, I forgive my husband's killer and Jesus and all of that. That's not for them. What is for them, and the people who I'm convinced are being paid by Russia, is Nick Fuentes and Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson. And we are now transcending into a level of influence over the Republican Party that is going to make Trump look like a moderate. These are people who think Hitler, and say publicly, I don't know what Trump thinks about Hitler privately, but he certainly, I don't think publicly, has ever praised him. Fuentes and Owens have. They think the Holocaust didn't happen. They think that Trump sucks because he's too close to, and I quote, the Jews. You have Tucker saying all of that in a much more polite way. And that's what MAGA 2.0 is shaping up to be. And for anybody who thinks that Tucker made too much money from CNN and Fox News to have to take a dime from Russia, you're really funny. There is never enough. Donald Trump made a lot of money on The Apprentice, and guess what? It is never enough.
Well, I mean, Tucker's definitely on the payroll of Russia. That's been, clear for years, particularly him, blaming Ukraine for Russia's invasion, which head scratching.
Did we need to see that? Did we remember that Putin interview where he sat there for 3 hours and was lectured about the 14th century Russian might and how that translated to 21st century Russian
What about the food shopping and shitty Moscow grocery stores?
Yeah, and then getting the Potemkin Village tour of Moscow and seeing, this is great, this is clean, this is so much better than New York City. Look at these subways. Yeah, the Russian subway really actually is fantastic. That is true. I haven't been there in a long time, but as I recall, it is an incredible subway system. I also would not want to live there versus here, unless you're a super billionaire oligarch and can drive around in your armored Mercedes because your Maybach.
That could be taken away any moment.
It ain't so good for people else who live there elsewhere. I know this because I'm from there and I know people there. So they're not living it up, in the high life the way people are in Boise, Idaho. Let's put it that way. So, look, what's coming next is really scary. And I feel like this NSS was written for what's coming next. It is a nationalist document that takes the worst of European nationalism, combines it with the worst of American territorial hemispheric aggression, and wraps it all up in a bow and hands it to Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, particularly Vladimir Putin, on a silver platter, because at least with Asia, we are apparently going to defend, we're going to stay out of everywhere in the world except the first chain islands, from Taiwan all the way down to Indonesia. Those we're going to defend. Okay. All right. And if you're Xi Jinping, you're saying, why are you able to go to Venezuela and basically declare war on them when you've never even pretended that Venezuela was part of your country? But we can't do that to Taiwan, which we have said from the beginning belongs to us. I mean, and what's our moral answer to that? What is our answer period to that? And are we really going to get into a world war with China over Taiwan based on
No,
everything that you just heard right now,
no.
with the way we're behaving and our priorities effectively being hemispheric here?
Nope. Um, just to give you an example, in that part of the world, I can't remember. Again, forgive me. I've been away from news for a week, but last week, China and Russia teamed up and either flew in Japanese airspace or South Korean. I believe it was South Korean airspace. Enough for them to get alarmed and scramble jets, and I believe it was South Korea, and whatnot. Not a word from the United States, nothing. So you have China and Russia teaming up, and Russia's salivating over Japan again. Centuries old, bloody imperial ambitions. Not a word. But to get back to your thing, MAGA 2.0 is going to be uglier. It's going to be white nationalist. We have right now Nazi supporters inside, embedded within the regime. I mean, anywhere you look, I document these things on the tracker, and I'm like, my God, for them claiming to fight anti Semitism and weaponizing civil rights and grants and everything else, to defund universities under the guise of fighting anti Semitism. They have a lot of, when I say, I mean, these are actual like Nazi supporters. Inside, embedded it within the regime, and it's scary. On the other hand, the more extreme they go, I think the better it is, because the majority of Americans, whether they're conservative, lean right, and we're not talking about the 20% hardcore, on either side, because you have on the far right the extremist and the fringe, and then on the far left, you have like the Greenwalds and the Mates, who are also on Russia's payroll. And that whole, left, like fringe, extreme, communist, ESA, left wing. The majority of Americans, I would say 80%, fall in the middle. And I can tell you, my whole block voted for Trump. My actually whole neighborhood voted for Trump, every single house here. But if I were to bring them a Nick Fuentes back candidate or type of candidate or Candace Owens, they would say, "What is this shit? Get this shit out of here."
You
Um,
know what? We used to say that about Trump 10 years ago, so I don't know. I think the Overton window keeps moving. I mean, you and I could just there's
yeah,
no,
yeah.
we just disagree on this. I think the Overton window keeps moving and moving and moving, and we can't normalize this, because
No, we can't.
the minute it's normalized the way Trump is normalized, people, we're like boiling frogs, and the you put them in cold water, and you just, or lobsters, right? You put them, well, I guess lobsters you put in boiling water, but frogs, you just turn the heat up, and then by the time it's boiling, they're dead. They have no idea, because it's a warm bath they swim around in. And I think that's the fear here. The other thing that the Russians are doing, and I want to spend a little bit of time on this, Olga, because you brought this to my attention, which is interesting, is, and I'm going to just read this header from the Guardian that just came out yesterday. Belgian politicians and senior finance executives have been subject to a campaign of intimidation orchestrated by Russian intelligence, aimed at persuading the country to block the use of 185 billion euros in assets for Ukraine, according to European intelligence sources. There's been, I'm going to paraphrase here, deliberate targeting of key figures at Euroclear, which is a securities depository holding the majority of Russia's frozen assets. So, there's a movement afoot to have Ukraine get access to those frozen assets in order to be able to rebuild Ukraine. And apparently the Russians are now doing everything they can to target and intimidate financial and political leaders in Belgium from doing that.
And you could add us to the list, because the U.S. has been putting pressure, so they're working either alongside Russian intelligence or in parallel with Russian intelligence to do everything to stop those funds from being released. They've been doing this for like already a few months, and now the Russians news came out that they're doing it. So
Yeah. It's not a surprise. It's not a
no.
surprise. But they'll do it, and there'll be some sort of probably horrible personal scandal involving one of these people, or some affair exposed, or some sort of financial impropriety exposed on their part, or just something that they don't want out there. Their children threatened, their wives threatened, their families threatened, and that will be the hostage on the tarmac that they will throw the Russians. They only need one to get everybody else to think that they have to back off.
Yep.
So
On the brighter side, Ukraine blew up another submarine using a drone. And Ukraine continues showing, I mean, with everything happening, and all this betrayal by the United States and the, uncertainty in Europe, how to respond. And, they're not going all in, but at the same time, they know that they need to keep Ukraine afloat because, I mean, every single intelligence assessment says if Ukraine falls, Europe is the rest of Europe. Any NATO country could be next. Even if Ukraine doesn't fall, it could be happening. The same thing can happen, but Ukraine continues showing, their out of the box operations with the little that they have. How they used in this case a water drone to blow up a submarine, whether it was Operation Spiderweb to take out the fighter jets, the strategic bombers that they did, earlier this year. Ukrainians are doing everything they can and showing the future of warfare. Like it's no longer, that you need tanks and heavy equipment. I mean, a cheap drone took out a $400 million submarine. So it just shows you, the ingenuity that Ukrainians are using for survival. And again, as far as this plan that Trump continues trying to shove with Kushner now aboard and Witkoff, the real estate guy, shoved down Ukraine's throat. Zelensky very clearly came out and said what we've all been saying. He has no authority to, hand away land. And he said, as far as with land concessions, this I did manage to see in Ukrainian news. With land concessions, he said, "Well, I'll consider it as far as maybe we'll have a referendum." So
that's what he
again,
said. Yeah, no,
yeah,
he was very clear. He said, and that's the only thing he can say because that's in the Constitution. I know that Trump has no respect for the Constitution in this
no,
country, but there is a Constitution in Ukraine that exists.
yep,
The Constitution that exists in Ukraine is that they cannot, under any circumstances, give away their land. Now, I will say this: even if Zelensky were to wave a magic wand and say, "Fine, we will give away all of the Donbass. We will give away Kherson, and even, let's throw in Odessa for just for the hell of it, right?"
yeah,
Which they're not even asking for. Let's just throw that in. It's a port city. It's an important city. Let's throw that in too. If he delivered all of that to Donald Trump on a silver platter and said, "Now go to the Kremlin, Steve Witkoff, Jared, go to the Kremlin right now and give that to Vladimir Putin." You know what Putin's answer is? Nope. So I don't know who Ukraine is negotiating with, but it's not with the Russians. And I don't know who the United States thinks it's negotiating on behalf of, but it's not negotiating on behalf of the Russians.
And if Zelensky were to give, let's say, Crimea, that's been occupied over 10 years, 11 years now, going on to 12. Say Zelensky said, okay, you know what, we'll give Crimea. Zelensky would be dragged out of the office because Ukrainians are not, I don't want to be rude, but they're not like here, like there, they immediately, you'll see such a mobilization. Zelensky will
Yeah,
be out of
yeah,
power within, I'm not kidding if I say 72 hours. I think I'm overstating it.
yeah,
They would literally, because there everything is very organized. We saw Zelensky attempt over the summer um, to put NABU and under the anti-corruption organizations that are independent under the control of the presidential office. Um, I can tell you, like, the outrage there, I don't think people had enough time to react outrageously before they were already in the street. Now, this is under drones and missiles. Every single city filled up with people demanding this immediately be reversed. And guess what? 48 hours later, it was reversed. 2 full days of protest, and people there, they don't care about drones, missiles, anything. You know, 48 hours later, he reversed the decision. Number one, and everything remained independent, and that's it. Because this was one of the main things in 14 for Maidan to set up independent anti-corruption organizations to monitor anyone or any agency in power in order to be able to step in if there's any kind of abuse of power, any kind of corruption. And I mean, if anything came out of Maidan, it was probably the most solid anti corruption warriors in the country who literally, uh, spend their day and night tracking where all the money is going and what is happening. So Zelensky can't give anything away. Trump is, making a circus out of this. We're about to hit New Year's. We're no closer than we were last New Year's. And then at the end of the day, it's very disappointing with American media. And I keep scratching my head, although I should be used to it, that every single time Trump made a comment, we're closer than ever to a peace plan. And I started catching up on my tracker. And several headlines in various media outlets. Oh, Ukraine and Russia on the verge of a peace plan. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, I'm sorry for cursing, but this, like, really? Like, are you serious? And like, they keep peddling this. First of all, U.S. media, being the fact that this is a democracy, or at least was a democracy in this country, U.S. media should be framing that, the pressure needs to go on Russia to get out. Like, Ukraine needs to do zero, nothing. All they need to do is exist. And if anyone wants this to end, all the pressure needs to be on Russia. Like, get out. I mean, if someone breaks into your house, are you going to sit and negotiate with them which rooms are they going to take? Or are the police going to come surround the house and do everything to get the assailant out of your house? And here the framing, like, peace plan, negotiate. Why should Ukraine negotiate for anything? If America gets invaded tomorrow by Mexico, what, we're supposed to sit and negotiate, which American children they can keep, like, oh, here, you could keep these 20,000 American children and this territory and these Americans, because we don't care about these Americans, so keep them under occupation, and that's it. Give me a break. So we're back to square one. Back to
We're going to be, listen, we're going to be back to square one as long as Ukraine wants to keep going and as long as Russia wants to keep going. And the problem is that Russia wants to keep going.
Oh yeah,
all the way, because here's how this ends for Russia, just so you know. I believe only if Donald Trump is no longer in office, if J.D. Vance is no longer in office, if a Democrat comes in who does what needs to be done, which is we're going to seize all your assets, we're going to ban all your oligarchs, the ones who are here now, whose kids are in American schools, bye-bye. Now, Putin doesn't really care about that, but also the money that we know where Putin's money is, the Panama Papers, they've moved them by now, but I mean, we know where they are.
absolutely.
I mean, we don't know where they are, but I'm sure our intelligence services know where Putin's money is. Take it. Yeah. Take it. Take it. And that will only happen if a real president with a real backbone comes in. Because when Biden, God bless Joe Biden, but he equivocated and he really equivocated on arms and on all of this. And I just remember the whole narrative was, well, we can't help the Ukrainians. We'll start World War III. But here's the problem for Putin, and this is ultimately what the dilemma is. He cannot lose this war. And by losing this war, he cannot come home without Ukraine. Because historically, what has happened to every Russian ruler, and I can give you chapter and verse going back to the Crimean War, which was in the 19th century, when they came home without a victory, they were gone. The Crimean War, the Tsar died of basically heartbreak when they got their asses handed to them in Crimea back in, that was Florence Nightingale days back in the 19th century. In 1905, they swore that they would, the mighty Russian Empire was going to defeat little Japan, little insignificant, teeny tiny Japan. In 1905, the Japanese blew up the Baltic Fleet and Russia was defeated. And that was the start of the first Russian Revolution. The second Russian Revolution, the one that got rid of the Tsars, happened because they were losing World War I, a war that was promised, when they gave Serbia their backing, they promised would be over in 30 seconds. That dragged on for years. And when that wasn't going well, the Tsar got overthrown, and ultimately the Bolsheviks came to power. They spent 10 years promising their people that they were going to defeat people in Afghanistan because they lived in caves and didn't have electricity, and how, of course, the mighty Soviet Union was going to defeat Afghanistan and annex it. That didn't happen. And that's when the Soviet Union collapsed because they didn't have money to pay for their bills to help out. I mean, I told the story the other day, but Erich Honecker, the head of East Germany, called when the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, called Mikhail Gorbachev in a panic and said, "Give us money. We need help." And Gorbachev said, "We can't help you. We're broke." And they were broke because of Afghanistan. And that's when the wall came down, and that was the domino effect. And of course, that's when the Velvet Revolution happened and all of that happened. And the Warsaw Pact basically collapsed. And then ultimately the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. I'm saying all of this to say that, if I know this, believe me, Putin, who lived in Dresden during the collapse of all of that and was shoving Stasi and his own KGB information into an incinerator because they were so afraid of getting lynched by real Germans for what they were doing there. He understands that full well. He saw what happened to every Russian ruler going back from the Tsars to Soviet days. He's screwed. He's in a bind. He has to deliver. He has ginned up these people so much he has to deliver. Now, he has run what I think is the best intelligence operation in the history of intelligence operations in what they did. And Olga and I documented this, in minute detail, exquisite detail, as to the operation they ran to get Donald Trump elected. And it's paying off in a massive, massive way. But that can turn on a dime. And if Trump is not here anymore, and you suddenly have a United States that is resurgent and wants our European allies to be resurgent too, then we're getting to a point that's quite dangerous for everybody involved.
And I'll leave on a good note. On the brighter side, according to Ukrainian calculations, the Russian economy can continue funding this war maybe through 27, 28 tops. That's stretching it. Now, Russians are used to, living on breadcrumbs and standing in line for breadcrumbs. And if they need to, they will again. But it is good news because their economy is taking a hit. And they are really, they're not going to be able to just continue this at this rate, much longer without collapsing the country. The other good news is that you had St. Petersburg out, no cell service. Imagine St. Petersburg, that's like New York City. For a week, they had no cell service. My mom's hometown of Omsk, They haven't had internet since August. We're in December. Every time I hear how bad things are there, it makes me happy because at least they're getting a taste of what the medicine of what is happening. It's clearly nothing close to Ukrainians being buried under rubble and having missiles land in their apartments while they're sleeping. But they are having, they're not having the best of times between internet outages, between gasoline, long gasoline lines. So, I mean, at least, they're feeling it. I mean, my hope is that the pressure will build eventually enough that the, generals or whoever, Timchenko or whoever, Patrushev will be like, we need to get rid of Putin, put all the blame on him, and then at least be able to recoup. We'll see. But at least domestically, they're having issues, financially, which is helpful. To the point that they've classified all the economic data. But you could still pretty much get a good read of what is happening, and then talking to people on the ground, you see that it's clearly impacting every household. So if Europe gets their act together, look, Europe is just as powerful as the United States. They need to obviously, hopefully, from this NSS agenda. um they realize that the United States, and this is what I've been saying since January, that at best we're going to be neutral and stay out of everything. At worst, we could be a threat to them and invade a European country. So they need to be prepared for both scenarios, not just Russia, but the United States, and God forbid, United States teaming up with Russia, to attack a European country. So they need to get their act together. They can produce just as many weapons. I know that they've increased. Germany, France, and other countries have increased production. I know UK, is it? No, France. France gave a nuclear umbrella to Poland and a few other Eastern European countries. So they really need to take United States out of their national security strategy or European security strategy, and at least for the next few years plot forward, and that's it. Here,
Yeah.
what we can do is punish the Republicans, because I can tell you that you are seeing the break with Republicans. Interestingly enough, it's escalating. And again, not because they are having a Jesus moment and like, oh my God, American democracy. No, they see the writing on the wall that Americans are pissed, and that if they are to have any kind of chance of staying in power, that they need to start pushing back against Trump, because Trump doesn't have their interest in mind. His only interest is filling up his crypto wallets and his bank accounts. That's his only interest. How much can he seize, from US resources, and how much can he take for himself? So, I mean, we are seeing the pushback more, and you have quite a handful, like, with the Witkoff plan, you saw quite an uproar in both the Senate and the House, with the plan that was written by Russia and by Dmitriev, delivered by Dmitriev. You saw a complete, I mean, very public, rift with Trump on this, as he's pitching the 28-point plan. And, you have Republicans saying, this is Moscow's plan. This is not written by United States. So here we need to put pressure and punish at least as much as we can, like the swing state voters. I mean, swing state districts, like we need to punish Republicans here for this. And then, hopefully we can kind of mitigate some
And
of this horror.
and to my European friends, listen, I have family in France I'm very close to. They protest all the time. Every time there's a proposal to expand the retirement age, or to extend it, I should say, or to take away any of their benefits. I get it. I get it. I get that you're very proud of your social safety net. I get that you don't want any of that cut or delayed. However, however, you gotta up your defense spending to protect yourselves and your families and your children and your grandchildren. And I'm telling you right now, that is more important than having to work an extra year or two. And there's not enough money for both a lot of times. And so it's not for me to lecture the Europeans, but what I think the Russians are trying to do is gin up all of these protests, whether it's the Yellow Jacket protests they did a few years ago in other places, in order to bring down governments that want to, want to spend more money on the military. The U.S. can't do it for you anymore. We have I wish we could. I would pay more in taxes for us to do that. I have no problem paying more money out of my own pocket to protect Europe and NATO. The problem is that our president will not spend money on that, no matter how much we tell him we want it. So it's up to you now. It is up to you now.
And the thing is that this all could have been avoided and still can be avoided if Europe really gets, like their shit together and helps Ukraine defeat Russia. They can. If Ukraine was armed, if Ukraine can take out submarine with a water drone, I mean, this is like a joke. After they hid these submarines, because because Ukraine kicked them out of the, Black Sea, and they had to relocate their whole fleet because of the continued strikes. I mean, we all remember Moskva and all the other, ships that Ukraine sunk. So, and Ukraine has no naval force. Like, they don't have a legitimate navy. That was destroyed after the 2014 invasion. I mean, they've been rebuilding it, but it's still not like a US Navy or any other country that has a traditional navy. And if Ukrainians can do this, imagine if Europeans, and this is what my problem was with Biden, had Ukraine been armed properly at the beginning, Russia would have been long defeated. And that's it. And Russia gets a sound defeat. They'll go lick their wounds and then, overthrow, kill their leader, and then prepare for their next blood imperial thirsty leader. But right now, at a minimum, if Europeans don't want missiles and drones, attacking Paris or Belgium or any other, country across Europe, help Ukraine win. Let them finish this off once and for all. And they can with the right weapons. They just need weapons. That's all they need. They're not asking for troops. They never asked for American troops. Unlike MAGA, would like people to think the Ukrainians want American boots on the ground. They never once ever said that. They want weapons. They have weapons. They can defeat Russia, give it such a good defeat. And that's it. And strategic defeat. I mean, you saw where I loved seeing the news on the submarine, but Russia's been making a lot of money and funding its, war through the shadow fleet, bypassing Western sanctions and moving oil from here, to India, China, whatnot. And Ukraine already took 2 of the shadow fleets far away from Ukraine. And they took 2 of the shadow fleets out. Like, Ukrainians can do the work. Just give them the weapons so finally they could end this, have a normal night's sleep, and that's it. And then Europeans won't have to worry about, mobilizing their own people. I mean, really, Germany, out of all, it's interesting. I read the news, that the announcement that they're going to mobilize their people for potential war, but they didn't have to go that far. They have the best weapons. Give the Taurus missiles before mobilizing. Give weapons, and then you can live comfortably in your European cities and towns, and Ukrainians can handle and take care of the rest and provide the security. And then if Russia ever gets out of hand, you're going to have Ukraine that really, frankly, out of the whole NATO alignment, Ukraine is the best fighting force. They're the only ones who know how to fight out of every country, because US hasn't really fought a war in a few decades. Especially now with, the changing technologies and drones and the new way of warfare. Ukrainians are fighting guerrilla warfare and drone warfare and every kind of warfare you could think of, and on top of it, using, this out of the box thinking to carry out operations that people never thought could be possible, especially with, drones and whatnot. So,
All right. On that note, it was great to see you. This is it for the year, right? Because next week is Christmas, and the
the
week
week,
after that is New Year's. So we will see everybody on January 8th. My God, it seems like a very long time from now. We will see everybody.
really?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, you're right. Yep. The Thursday
Yeah. So
after.
we will see everybody on January 8th. Everybody, if you're celebrating Hanukkah and you're in the middle of it now, happy Hanukkah. If
Happy
you're
Hanukkah.
celebrating Christmas, Merry Christmas next week. If you are celebrating Kwanzaa, I don't want to go through all the list of all the different holidays. Happy holidays to everybody, whatever you're celebrating, and Happy New Year to everybody. This has been an incredibly difficult year. I think we should prepare ourselves for another difficult year next year, but we're in it together. We're here to get each other through it, and Olga and I will be doing this until they shut us down, and even after that, somewhere. So, thank you to this community.
we might be. You saw the latest news. The denaturalization now push.
Yeah,
You and I might be left stateless.
well, you'll be stateless because you weren't born in Russia. I'll be shipped back to Russia and then straight to the gulag. So I'll try to think about me when that happens, if that happens. Everybody, thank you. Thank you to this community, seriously, because Olga and I started this this year, and it's been just such a joy to have everybody here with us every single week. Thank you to everybody who also joined us on Tuesdays for 20 weeks when we did our active measure series, something we did not anticipate going as long as it did. Thank you to everybody who read that. Thank you to everybody who joined our seminar this past fall. We're going to come back in January. Probably we're going to have to get together over the holidays actually and figure out, but we'll come up with a new one for the coming first quarter of 2026. And just this Pax Americana community has just been fantastic. And so from the bottom of our hearts, we thank you for it. And have a wonderful rest of the year. We will see you on January 8th. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.